Hello everyone, today I'm going to be breaking down the Pyro simulations I made for the Fnatic Valorant IGI video. Let's get into it. Today we're going to be also focused on how I sourced the Pyro from the floor, because that was a technique that I had to figure out myself. There may be more efficient techniques, but in my case this is what I figured out in the deadline that I was given. So it's not going to be a step-by-step, but I will be breaking down the nodes. So let's get started. In the foreground, which is the Geo here on the floor, there's not much going on. It's just the Geo being loaded into Houdini, converted into polygons, the normals being created, slash like just making sure they're all good. As you can see, the normals come in a bit strange. So I just added a normal node to fix that. Poly extrude for some depth. The only reason I use the poly extrude is for the VDB from polygons, which I use for a collider later on. But as far as the Geo is concerned, I only really need it up until this normal for now. And now we're in the Pyro source, I can actually show you more specifically how I went about to source my points. So we bring the geometry in, which is the floor here, convert it, do the normals, all that good stuff. And then there's an attribute noise I add. And the reason I add this attribute noise, you won't be able to see it here. If I go into density, you'll be able to see it. The reason I add this attribute noise is so I can break up the floor into parts that I want the smoke or the dust to emit from. Because if you think of desert floor and wind sweeping up the dust off of the rocks and the sand, it's not sweeping every surface at once. And every surface does not have the same amount of dust or sand on it. So if I just set the geometry as an emitter on its own, everything would be emitting dust, and that would be a little overkill for this scene. So I wanted very specific parts to emit dust. So that's why I used an attribute noise, and I just ran it over the density. I think by default it runs on color. I think, but I ran it on density in the floats here. And that's how I got this. And if you try and do the same, you're going to need to come into the information and then click density to see that effect toggled on. I'll leave it on for now. Next thing, I wanted to make a group for emission. So I created an emit group. In this node, all I did was edit the base group section to basically say, if your density is more than 1, you are in this group. So in this case, any of these red areas. And then I also said keep in bounding regions so that I could keep the emission points down to the floor. I didn't want the rocks to be emitting. So if I disable this, you'll see everything is emitting. And if I enable it, you can see that it's only pieces inside this bounding box. And if I grab my handle tools and edit this, you'll see that this is all I did. I just dragged the box down until it was just the floor. Next up is a scatter node that I used to scatter points all over the geo. I didn't relax the iterations, but you definitely can if you want more of a clumped look or whatever you're going for. But I just left this as is. I'm actually going to come into my attribute noise and turn off the density for now, so I don't have to look at that. The visualization of it is still going to randomize the density, we just won't see it. And then next up, I made a blast node, which will delete any points that are not in my emit group. So this previously mentioned group, I named it emit. I didn't name the node, which I definitely should have. I will go ahead and do that now. But the group name is named emit. So everything in this group, all the points are named emit, or in the emit group rather. And then on the blast node, I selected the emit group and I deleted everything. So I have delete non-selected, but you can also invert this and delete the selected. But I have delete non-selected, so it destroys everything. And the final thing I did, which I forgot to mention, in the attribute noise, I believe it's in the noise pattern, I have the offset here animated. You can animate this by frame. You could do or I guess you could do $F and then or FF, or you could use whatever you wanted to drive this. I just animated it from the beginning to the end to slide around. So as you scrub through, you see that the points are being changed. If I come over to this and I do density and I show this, it might be easier to see it here. So as you can see, I just have the density attribute just slowly animating along, so that when we have this cache here, that it's just pushing the points along. The reason I did this is so that it's not picking up just dust and sand from one area, and that we can get a more dynamic simulation. And that's really part that took me the longest to figure out. I'm sure there's resources out there, but I just couldn't find them. So I had to figure out this very simple chain of nodes myself. After that, I just used my points that I created to create my pyro. I just ran a billowy smoke over the pyro source, and it creates a pyro source node because I named my original one pyro source, so I added another source on the end. And all that's happening in here is that it's turning my points into volume so that it can emit smoke from them, and then that's just file cached in here for speed. Here's my pyro network. There's nothing crazy going on in there. I just have my smoke object, and then I have my density. Sorry, no, this is collisions. So I have my collisions, which is the floor, and then I have my pyro density being sourced from our out density from the pyro source. And all I have here is a resize container to keep it have it expand itself, and then I have a gas wind, which is very slightly, which is pushing the wind along and pushing it down, down towards the floor very slightly. And then inside of my pyro object, or I think my pyro solver, I have the buoyancy lift on about 5, but you can change this to make the smoke sink or go up. And one other thing you can change as well, that I believe I did, is that I came into the temperature and I lowered the scale of the temperature. I believe it was a little bit higher, but I don't remember the settings for that. But that lowering the temperature will make the smoke sink lower to the floor. And that's essentially the entire scene. It's quite a simple setup, quite versatile. You can use this on any geo. And here is just the close of the character, which I use as a collider later on. So there's nothing special about that. Super simple technique, and it's especially useful if you're trying to have that mist coming off the floor, or if you're trying to have sand coming off of the floor, dust being blown up, and you want it to animate dynamically. Perhaps you want to have some low-laying mist. You can use this to source it and have it move along the floor instead of just emit from the entire geometry. So it's definitely a technique that I'll be using again, and I hope that you found it useful today. If you found this useful today, I would very much appreciate if you considered liking and subscribing and leaving a comment down below for what you would like to see next. All right, thank you and take care.